We are live. We are live. Welcome to it. So, yesterday was the 31st of October, which is what is celebrated in many countries as Halloween. And there was this amazing trailer that came out advertising a film called Every Day is Halloween, starring Ayanda Boroto. And it was saying that, listen, this is going to be out, box office, get ready for this film. But then it turns out this is not actually a film. It is a campaign by DStv that is saying every day is Halloween for women in South Africa. And we know the realities that we are facing about every day being Halloween for women in South Africa. That so many of us are touched directly or indirectly by the sheer violence and fear of living in this country, and this violence that is directed towards women, be it intimate partner relationships, be it complete and utter strangers. So today, this is what we're going to be talking about. Ayanda Boroto is going to be joining me in a little bit just to chat to us about her role in the campaign, but also for us to have a conversation around gender-based violence. And I'd love for those of you that are joining, and thank you so much for joining, to also contribute to the conversation. Sometimes we only talk about these things when there's a headline that props up, and now we are pained and we are miserable and we are going through this heart-wrenching agony as a country at something painful like what happened to Uyinene Mrwetyana. And sometimes it takes those moments for a conversation to happen. But DStv was like, we're not going to wait for that moment again. We're going to talk about it now because the statistics are horrific. And I'm going to touch on the statistics in a little bit. For now, I want Ayanda to join in. I think the trailer was so beautifully shot. And when you understand what it's about, now you're like, wow, that is actually scarier than any fictional Halloween character that one could be thinking of. So Ayanda was the key lead in this particular campaign and trailer. And we're going to be talking about, not just gender-based violence experiences, but also the campaign itself. Ayanda, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, Relebohile. How are you?
I'm good, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good under the circumstances. It's a difficult topic to talk about, but I'm good under the circumstances.
Yeah, and you know what's difficult? I mean, for me, I get happy that there are more opportunities to have conversations to raise awareness. I've interviewed so many victims of gender-based violence, and so many of them will talk about things that have happened to them as if it's nothing, but it's such a big deal because, I don't know, do you feel like we've become so desensitized to the realities that people are facing on a daily?
I think it's a survival thing for people, honestly. I can tell you now, when we did this campaign, I was really at a place where I just checked out. I talk about GBV all the time, but I was exhausted. I'd really just checked out. And I think when the very Nosicelo story happened, the young girl who was chopped to pieces and put in a suitcase, for me, I think that's when I just felt traumatized the most because I couldn't comprehend for the life of me how any human being in the midst of all the noise, because I think the noise and the messaging around GBV over the last 5 years has really intensified, right? And even men have joined the conversations, which has been great. And I couldn't understand how in the midst of all of that, you can have an individual who would think that that is okay. And at that point, I just felt defeated. I felt hopeless. And I checked out. So I do think we do as a society get to a place where we're just fatigued because we're either not finding the right solutions, we're feeling like we're not getting the necessary help. And so we get to a place where we're hopeless. But I think with corporates like DStv coming on board and other big corporates playing their parts, it really does help the fight, and it really does rejuvenate the zest and the fire in those who are the voices for those who are voiceless.
So tell me, how did you actually get drawn into this campaign, and what was your first thought when they told you this is what we want to do and this is what we're thinking of doing? What was that for you?
So initially, I wasn't too sure about the Halloween concept because, to be fair, a large majority of the people or women who are affected by GBV in this country are majority lower LSM, Black women. And I
Yes.
wasn't sure how that messaging was going to land with our Black women, right? But I also realized there was really an opportunity to communicate to a higher LSM. And I think that's been part of the problem for me in the past, where we haven't focused or haven't used an approach of targeted messaging, because the dynamics are different for every pillar of society. And so we can't possibly think that a one size fits all. So for me, I felt when they told me about it, I felt, but then thought, great opportunity, because
And I have to agree with you.
essentially,
I have to agree with
mm-hmm,
you. It's not like the horror genre is huge in SA, where we're producing horror films left, right, and center. You know, we've got Devil's Dorp that everybody was like, what? But that was
yeah,
not like some Jason character or Scream. It's a character, it's fictional. You can still go to bed at night. This is like you're trying to equate somebody's real horror with Halloween. So I get where you're coming from, where you're like, how exactly is this going to land? Are we making less of the pains that people are facing?
true. And also, like I said, for me, it was an opportunity to tap into a different pillar of society, but also I think the approach, because it's an experiential approach, I've always thought as a filmmaker myself that film storytelling is such a powerful medium, right? Such a powerful medium for people to just experience or walk in people's shoes. So when I hear people saying, when I watched the trailer, I was so nervous, I was so scared, and it was horrifying, and I can't wait to see what next, and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to finish the film. What comes to me is, that's great, because actually now you really get to feel how women feel.
So now you agreed, you're like, okay, I'm on board, I'm gonna do this. What was the process like of creating a trailer where you also know that it's not a real movie, it's actually a campaign? Was the process different for you as an actress, or you went through the same process?
No, it was the same process. Because you create it as a movie, and then, or you create enough content to even make a 5-10 minute film, and then you cut down the scenes to what would land on a trailer, right? But the process is the same, because we don't know what scenes they're going to use. And so we shot this over a period of 2 days. It was grueling. It was hard. We shot a lot of scenes at night. There was a lot of running. I got wet. I was in a storm drain at some point. I was carrying the 9-year-old character who plays the daughter in the film on my back. So it was really grueling, but I had to get into character like I would any other role.
Tell me about your co-star. Did she have an understanding as to what it is you guys are doing?
I think she did, and I'd be very honest with you. I I was quite conflicted, really, because I wasn't sure if this is a conversation I wanted to have with her. I think she understood, but I also tried to shield her from the reality of what was really, 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 really happening. And it's an interesting thing, because I have kids. I have 4 kids in the house, and I have 2 grown daughters in the house. And that's always been a difficult thing for me as a parent, as to, how do we realistically have these conversations with our children, so that they don't go into the world thinking the world is safe, and thinking that and being naive, but still not necessarily taking their innocence away at a time when really it's not necessary. So it's always a hard balance. But I think she understood. And at the same time, I did what I could to shield her.
So let's touch on that then. You mentioned you're a mother. You mentioned you've got daughters. Do these conversations happen in your home, and are they initiated purely from a the mindset of I'm being intentional about making my children aware of X, Y, and Z? Or is it like, because it's in the headlines now, we're like, okay, we need to talk about this?
I think I've been intentional about it. Certainly for the last 4 years, I've been very intentional about it. And of course, they also happen randomly when there is a headline. Interestingly, I think the conversations intensified, especially when one of my daughters was getting ready to leave high school for university. And the conversation that had come up is she doesn't want to stay at rest. And she's scared of staying alone because, she's just fearful. She's fearful of what could happen to her. And, at some point she really was contemplating, do I do UNISA online? Because I'm so scared. I don't know if I can. So yes, I think definitely intentional. And of course they come up as and when the topics arrive. But again, it's such an important thing that we've got to get to a place where we are having open conversations with our daughters and with our sons. And lento yokuthi indaba zabantu abadala, that thing, we don't talk about these things because
that time
is over. That time is over.
That time is over. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because again, the young people that are facing gender-based violence, I mean, we've heard of the story of the young female who was, murdered on campus. So just to speak to your daughter's fears, it's a genuine fear that the ex-boyfriend who was just refusing that this relationship is over came in and murdered her. And you would think that perpetrators of such crimes would at least have some kind of shame to not want to do things in front of people or do things where they don't care. That's how brazen the violence has become. So let's touch on the young people aspect and what it is that maybe we think is going wrong, because I would think like we're the woke generation, the younger people, we know better, we do better. The men are coming on board, they want to march with us. But like the statistics are not reflecting that.
Oh, it's such a packed question. And I think it has layers and layers and layers, because I think for me, certainly where I'm coming from and my perspective is that when we treat or when we talk about gender-based violence, we're always wanting to treat the symptoms, right? So sikela phezulu, we want to treat the symptoms, and there's got to be a deep understanding of how, as a society, we've created a conducive environment for toxic masculinity to thrive, and where that begins, because we want to talk about the leaves and the fruits, but we're actually not really talking and addressing the roots, the root cause of why we are where we are. And we've got to unpack that in all different pillars of society. We have to talk about the societal patriarchy, toxic patriarchy, and we have to talk about the institutional toxic patriarchy from a cultural aspect, from a political aspect, from a leadership aspect, from a religious aspect. We've got to talk about it in the family tradition, aspect. Right? And I think the family tradition is such an important one, because that is where we make or break our children, and that is where we make actually the people who are going to go and engage with society. And I think, this idea that when we want to see change, or when we're trying to change a narrative, we have to do big things. We have to be on big stages. We have to be on Relebogile is live, and we have to be speaking to crowds of people. I think that narrative about change, when it comes to this specific aspect, though great, though impactful, we need to understand that it really is an individual thing. It really is about the family structure. And we have to redefine how we are engaging this topic in the family, and how we are actually perpetuating the power imbalance between male and female in the family, how we are unseating and dethroning the girl child in the family, and attributing toxic power to the boy child in the family, because that is where it starts. It starts with Ubaba having his own chair, right? It starts with the girls being the only one to take the dishes to the kitchen when we finish eating. It starts with all these small little things that we don't understand actually creates a power narrative that is distorted in our children, that makes a certain gender think that they are more powerful or they are more important than the other. So for me, I think we have to start with what we have where we can. So in the sphere of influence, where we can be most impactful is within the family. And I think that's where it's largely gone wrong. Parenting, absent parenting, distant parenting, parents just simply also just not having time. And so children being parented by social media, being parented by people's opinions and ideas, being parented by the toxicity that they see in the world. And so, yeah, I really do think everybody can play a part, but we've got to redefine what that looks like for us in the family structure.
And I think you've touched on some very, very important things. And I think the one that maybe we haven't highlighted as much, because we are speaking on the assumption that the children that we speak of, the young boys who are growing up to become abusive, violent men, or we're speaking as if they grew up in homes where they did not witness violence themselves, and patriarchy and all the small little messages that they're getting just by how they were raised influence them to become who they are. But the reality is, if the stats are what they are, affecting the generations that are above us, then they are little boys, they are young men who are growing up currently in homes where they're observing behavior that is violent, and they become so desensitized to this behavior, which either they don't think is wrong, or they don't know is wrong, or they know is wrong but don't care to do anything about it.
Precisely. And to add to that, Relebohile, I also think we also have to attribute some kind of responsibility to the female as well, whether it's the female head in the home, to say, girl children role model themselves against the mother. And so whatever we accept as the norm, they will accept, or they will accept the standard of either love and value or worth for themselves, right? So it's also important that we then become the examples of women that understand and know their worth and value, so that our girl children don't stay in toxic relationships, so that they understand that when a guy treats me this way, that is toxic, that is wrong, and those are the signs, and I need to leave.
We're gonna continue to obviously break down the how we are here, and hopefully that will help us drive the messaging to the solutions. I want to come back to the campaign itself and the fact that, of course, multi-choice thinking, that it's so important. And I want to just take a look at what the rollout of this campaign has been. So 26th of October was when the announcement was made of South Africa's biggest horror story, which we know now is just the reality that women are living in their homes. And the trailer is out there. For those of you that want to see it, is out on social media. Check out the DStv account and you can see the movie trailer. To then yesterday it being revealed that it is a campaign because every day is Halloween for women in South Africa. And yes, this is to fight gender-based violence, to where we are now. So some of the stats, and I have posted it as well in my Insta stories, where it is revealing, and some of the stats that are mentioned: 2,695 women murdered in a year in South Africa. And every 3 hours, a woman is killed. Every 3 hours. Now, I know, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, which is there will always be people who are saying, but men are also victims of. That is acknowledged. We can agree that that is acknowledged, but the reality is the rate at which women are being abused. We are topping world lists. We are topping lists. Like, these are the things that we are winning. These are the lists that we're at the top of. Gender-based violence in a country like our own. So props obviously to DStv for deciding to jump on board of this campaign. And some of the other statistics that have been shared that I'll just love to share, that we can also just have a chat about. So this is according to the South African Police Service's annual crime statistics presentation. And we are mindful, Ayanda, of the fact that these are only cases that are reported. There are still stats that do not reflect the reality because it's not reported. And we'll chat a little bit about the dynamics as to why that doesn't happen. But according to the SAPS annual crime statistics presentation, this is now for April 2019 to March 2020. Approximately 2,695 women are murdered in a year, and every 3 hours a woman is killed. These are not titles for a blockbuster movie. We reiterate, because I know there's some people who are like, I'm too scared to watch this movie. This is just the reality of what it is that we are living. And just so we can touch on this, Ayanda, maybe you can reflect, why is it that women don't report? Why is it that some women don't go to the station? I don't want us to assume that because the reason seems so obvious, but I don't want us to assume that everybody watching knows.
Sure.
It's heavy.
Because
it's heavy.
Yeah, it is heavy and it's layered. Because and I say we because I'm a statistic myself. Because we have to protect everybody but us, right? We have to protect the family name. You don't know what it's going to do to relationships. Even if they believe me, it almost seems like a couple of weeks, months later, it's like nothing's happened, right? So we haven't seen enough harsh consequences for perpetrators. And as a result, women have lost hope in the justice system. We've lost hope in our families. We've lost hope in society, because even within the same society, within our same families, there are people who make excuses, call them perpetrator apologists, right? Who make excuses for men who do these things. And so it becomes really difficult. And again, I think something I want to address is, I think as a society and as women, we're not speaking in unison, right? We're not speaking in one voice. And that's a challenge, because you've got gender-based violence and then you have the violations. And I want to touch a little bit on the violations, because that's where we differ a lot. So we seem to understand what violence is. So when somebody's hit you, when somebody's raped you, when there's aggression, right? We understand that to be, okay, that's GBV because they hurt you. But this is where it becomes tricky with the violations, because we've now categorized catcalling as a form of GBV, sexism as a form of GBV, right? However, it is only acknowledged or recognized as that in places where it's an institution. So if it's in the church or it's in the corporate sector, you can report sexism, you can report somebody violating you in this way, right? Whether it's something they've said, whether it's touching you inappropriately. And there can be consequences for that. But if I'm just Ayanda walking down the street, and somebody smacks my bum, or somebody says something offensive to me, I can't go and open a case for that. And so I think there are also conflicting messages about what constitutes GBV apart from the aggression. So the aggressive ones we understand, but the microaggressions we don't understand. And I think that is where a lot of the toxicity is perpetuated, because so many of the perpetrators get away with so much of the violations that they then just take it to the next level, right? And we're not dealing with the violations because we don't know how to deal with the violations. We only know how to deal with them in institutions, but we don't know how to deal with them in communities. We don't know how to deal with them in our families. right? And I think until we get to a place where we speak in unison, even about what that violation is as women, because I may think saying "Dudlu Ntombi" to me is offensive, but there are many women who think it's sexy.
Yes, I was going to say what's so difficult as well is even if you wanted to say, you know, this person who's busy catcalling me will turn around and say, "Nani ngeke shela baby king," you know. So
Yes,
now something that is a violation to you has been diminished to you over. Now it adds on the gaslighting, it adds on the next set of violations which treat you like you're overreacting or you're a liar.
precisely. And so I think there's still a long way to go. We're still pulling in different directions. So as far as I'm concerned, there's still confusion about what constitutes GBV. A classical example is date rape. You know, I'm with a guy, I end up in his room. I don't necessarily want to have sex with him. If if maybe he doesn't necessarily hold me down and he isn't necessarily aggressive, but maybe I've said no. And because I don't know, maybe I'm just feeling hopeless at this point because I'm in his room and so he continues. Is that rape? Is it not rape? Is it, you know what I mean? And so until we get to the nitty-gritties and we have clearly defined what constitutes those violations and it is made law. It is law, it goes into policies, and people can actually open a legitimate case against somebody, then we still have a long way to go because it's groups of women pulling in different directions.
Can I take it a step further? Because we know having policies and having it in law is actually not enough. We need our people on the ground, our SAPs, to be trained in how to adequately deal in these cases. Because I myself know that if I were ever a victim of, let's say, rape, for example, my natural instinct would not be to go to the police station first. My natural instinct would be to go to the hospital first because I wouldn't feel safe going to the police station. Safe in the sense that how are they going to hold space for me for this case? I would rather have the hospital call the SAPS and for them to come a statement because we know of the stories of women who are coming to report cases of rape, coming to report cases of their husband abusing them and them being told this is a family matter, please go deal with it at home, or what were you doing, my sister? Loena Lukisa X, Y, and Z. So beyond law, beyond policies, I think that's only the first step of the process. I think the second step is how are we actually implementing that? And then for there to be actual dire consequences for being caught for doing certain things, like abusing your wife, like any of the other gender-based violence aggressions and violations that are out there.
True, very true. And to add to that, in fact, to put a spanner in the works, then there's also the issue of the backlog of cases where people haven't reported something for many years, right? And then 10 years later, I want to open a case. What then? We're not equipped, we're not adequately equipped or trained to deal with such, right? And that's why a lot of perpetrators also end up getting away because I haven't been able to prove in a court of law that this happened. And I keep saying this to people that, well, if somebody hasn't been able to prove in a court of law, or the court hasn't been able to prove that they were violated or that a crime was done against them, it doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. And so there are those challenges as well, that where a system that is not adequately, it becomes difficult. And I think it's not just about South Africa, it's the world over. How do you prove a case that happened 40 years ago? Because
and
now that women are talking about it, sorry, Relebukile, I was adding that now that women are talking about it, or we're in a space where after the wildfire of the hashtag #MeToo movement, where women are feeling like they can talk about it and women are coming forward with these stories, people actually want to see justice served, but the cases are so old.
I was saying that I think the difficulty is that the way that the justice system is set up, because in a criminal case, it has to be beyond reasonable doubt. The difficulty is so much weight is placed on evidence, number one. Number two, which we know evidence is very rarely there in certain cases, just because of how and when people report and that type of thing. Secondly, so much weight is placed on a person having to remember when, how long, details that realistically you would not even be able to pay attention to because you are in the middle of a crisis. You know, you will be asked, okay, you say he was beating you the whole night. How long would you say that was? As if you were able to check the time to be able to monitor how long that is. Oh, you say he raped you at 7 p.m. Okay, so when did he finish? Like, did I check my watch after he, you know? So also there is so much weight that gets placed on evidence and remembering details that now the responsibility on you having to prove it becomes, as in to show and demonstrate that what you're telling is the truth, becomes so difficult that you end up thinking, what is the point of reporting anyways?
That's true. That's very true. And so I think you're quite right. We need a justice system that that is specifically for GBV cases. We need a targeted approach for these kind of cases, a specialized approach for these kind of cases. We need more training. We need training not just in the justice itself, so the processes, but also training in just emotional intelligence. How do you handle victims? There's still a lot of work to do there. But also just to add really quickly to what you were asking about, why women find it hard to report. I think the sad reality in our country, again, is that majority of our women are economically disempowered. And that is a big thing. That's a big contributor. And a part of my work has really been about supporting and advocating for economic empowerment, economic liberation for women, access to economic opportunities for women, and especially rural women, because a lot of women will tell you, where do I go? They'll ask you, where do I go? So if I leave him, where am I going to go? And this is why what we're finding in shelters is that they're introducing programs that are going to help them sustain themselves economically on their own, because majority of women who leave shelters end up going back to the abuser because that's who they're economically dependent on. So I think it's a big one for us to really delve into conversations about, but practically look for solutions as a country as to how do we help women economically sustain themselves and their children.
And I think that part of it is not highlighted enough, because for the mere fact that part of the abuse is also in many of the situations is disempowering a woman. So for example, where a man encourages you, you don't need to be working. You must actually be at home taking care of your children, so that the power dynamics are set up in a way that when they want to do whatever they want to do to you, you literally have nowhere to go. You know, you also are closed off from getting a break and going to a working environment where you can possibly tell somebody, this is what's happening to me, and have another voice that says that's not okay. So it's also the isolation, there's so many elements to it. And it's such a pity, you know, I've just become a mom, and I think about the fact that being a new mom now, suddenly I'm like, oh, I want to be at home. And how in somebody's marriage that this could be like, yes, be home. But now suddenly when you're like, I need to leave this abusive situation, you're like, where am I going to go? So the police are going to come and arrest this man. Where am I getting my medication from? What are we eating?
It really boils down to at least one aspect of it does boil down to stomach politics.
All right, I'd like to invite to join us Masimbulele Buso, who is the managing director of the Uyinene Mrwetyana Foundation. And the reason that she's joining us is because the Uyinene Mrwetyana Foundation is the foundation that's going to be the beneficiary of all the donations that will be coming through via Box Office. If you guys are DStv subscribers and are able to just log in and go, I encourage you to donate, but we're going to talk a bit more. So let's get her to join us, and then we can, speak more about the campaign, but also the amazing work that's been done. Let me see.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. So, Masi, let's jump straight into the Uyinene story. For those that, for whatever reason may not know the story, can you just share it again with us? And I think it will also just re-highlight how every day is Halloween in South Africa for women, because it doesn't have to, abuse is not only intimate partner related, where somebody might be thinking, thank goodness my man doesn't beat me or isn't trying to kill me. This, a stranger can just do this to you just on a day where you decide, I'm going to just be going to the post office.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know Uyinene, she was a 19-year-old who was loud and vibrant and beautiful and talented. She really, her life, if you follow us, you'll see we try and put out her life out there on our social media, because we think it's very important to know the people behind the stories and to know the people, to know the people behind the headlines. So,
Ayanda, are you still there? Just hold on one second. Ayanda, are you still there? Okay, I'm not sure. I think Ayanda may be having network issues. Just continue.
Yes, so she was full of life. She had just started her first year at UCT studying media, and we just all knew that she was going to be something big. She was so promising and she was so strong-willed. Her friends will describe her as the first person who spoke against, gender-based violence, patriarchy. I mean, you will hear her father still to this day talking about how Uyinene used to challenge him about, how come I never see you washing dishes, but mom always does the dishes, or, all those, small things. We just knew that she was just destined for a huge, life, and a big life, and a very kind of impactful life. So she was starting, I think it was within the 6 months that she was at UCT, she loved fashion. So she went and
Ayanda, are you okay there? I'm not sure if Ayanda can hear us, but what I'm gonna do is just see if I can okay. I'm not able to communicate with her, but just continue. Sorry about that.
No worries. So she went to she bought something online, probably a clothing item.
Yes.
And she went to collect it at the post office on that day. She was actually getting ready to plan her mother's birthday, which falls within that month of August. So she went to the post office, and when she got there, she met this man that said, no, come back later because the systems are down. And when she did come back later, she was the only one there. And unfortunately, the man that was employed by the post office, by the government, who, by the way, had a previous record of rape and assault, was still, employed by the post office, and decided to do what he did. And so that's what happened to Uyinene, but her story doesn't end there, really. We exist, unfortunately, because
I'm sorry to cut you, but just in case somebody doesn't know what happened, she went into the post office. Let's complete the story so that everybody that's watching, knows what, because it was a big story, but I don't want to take for granted and assume that everybody knows. Yes.
Absolutely. So she was gruesomely murdered, firstly raped by this man, this post office employee, sorry, and she was brutally raped and brutally murdered. And in the post office and kept there for a while. And he came back for her, and later, I mean, the story was all over, people looking for her. I think it was for about 2 days or 3 days, I can't remember. We were looking for her everywhere in Cape Town. Literally, the country stood still. Everyone was helping. And she was discovered buried or burnt and buried 2 days later. And yeah, unfortunately, that's how the story kind of unfolded for her.
So talk to us now about what some of the work the foundation is doing. We seem to have lost Ayanda. I'm not sure if it's load shedding, if we're back on schedule, but we seem to have lost her for now. I will try my best to get her back. But chat to us about, what the foundation is trying to do in terms of just, keeping her memory alive and the work that the foundation is doing.
Okay, so the family, Uinene's mother, together with myself, we're both in the field of psychology. We're both practicing psychologists. So she had a lot on her mind when this happened to her. She had previously been working in the space of gender-based violence herself at Rhodes University, and she felt it that this was, she wanted to make this gruesome and such horrible thing into a positive thing where she can add value back to the society and bring back change. So she founded this foundation. We launched 2 years ago, and what we did was we looked at South Africa as a whole, and we looked at what was missing, what gaps did we notice, and we wanted to look at gender-based violence and the response to gender-based violence holistically. So we wanted to kind of have a multifaceted view of gender-based violence, because talking about it definitely helps. Policy change helps, but they're not the only thing. Education, making sure that, we are dismantling patriarchy in society is also, it goes a long way. And so that's why we thought, let's do many things at once, but focused on 3 areas. So we focus on prevention, we focus on support for gender-based violence, and also we have a youth development program that runs from January to November, where we have selected around about 70 learners from high school, and we take them through a program that is aimed at kind of capacitating them to be better leaders, to have these conversations already in high school and kind of challenge what they have learned growing up. And so, yeah, those are some of the programs that we do.
Do you have any success stories or some positive stories you can share with us from the work that the foundation has done?
Yes. Well, we have many milestones that we have achieved. Obviously, we started 2 years ago, and 2 years ago, roughly 2 years ago, that's when COVID hit. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot that we could do. But I think the continued support from, the people that, assured us that we will never forget Uinene, we will continue supporting you, I think that has gone a long way. So one of the programs that we do is we offer psychological services to women and children who have been affected by gender-based violence. So they have an opportunity to kind of chat to a psychologist. And what we have found is that if I'm circling back to the conversation that you had about why women don't report, and I think it was Ayanda who said something about, financial reasons. There are many women who are stuck in marriages where the man is the provider, and they don't have family, they don't know anywhere else to go, and shelters kind of have an expiry date, if I can say that. You're kind of asked to leave after a certain period of time to make space for someone else. And so one of the stories that I can remember top of my mind was, a person that we kind of spoke throughout her process of leaving the husband and finally going to a shelter and finally getting a job and finally being independent and coming back to the foundation to assist as a volunteer. And I think those are some of the stories that kind of keep us going, because even the little change that we do goes a long way.
And I thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's important that the stories of positivity are shared so that there is hope out there. The statistics are dire, and it can make a person feel helpless and like they are just one of so many women that are unable to leave or come out of their situation. Again, some of the GBV statistics: femicide is 5 times higher in South Africa than the global average, with South Africa having the 4th highest female interpersonal violence death rate out of the 183 countries listed by the World Health Organization, and this is in 2016. South Africa having the 4th highest female interpersonal violence death rate out of the 183 countries listed. I mean, this is, we should be ashamed that we are so high up on the list. According to the SAPS, again, to reiterate, we've got the 2,695 women murdered in a year, and every 3 hours a woman is killed. So, you know, we need to, in our minds, be mindful of what that will feel like, the every 3 hours. That is 24 divided by 3, that's 8 times in a day. If you are to try and just set maybe those alarms to remind you of what the reality is. The stats are absolutely shocking and appalling. And as Ayanda already mentioned, there are various forms of gender-based violence, including domestic, physical, emotional, economic, and sexual violence. In South Africa, domestic violence is the most common form of GBV among partners. It often includes physical violence or threats of violence, and this kind of violence may also involve sexual assault, battery, coercion, and sexual harassment. So just to pick up on the example that you were using, Ayanda, about where does the violations and the violence, and I know you're using an example of if a woman decides to go out on a date with a guy and then they're in a room together, but she doesn't actually want to do it. One of the forms of violence that's not spoken about often enough is coercion, that a person puts you in a situation where they keep asking you so many times where eventually you say yes, but you don't actually want to do it, which in itself is still rape, because they want to be able to walk away and say, how, but you said yes. Like, why were you asking me 10, 15 million times, making me feel unsafe, possibly threatened, possibly like I have no choice. If I don't do it, I'm going to lose something. Coercion in itself is also a form of violence. So I think it's important that we mention that. Ayanda, I know, you know, there's something we need to touch on just in terms of intergenerational GBV. Let's talk about that.
Oh, so it's what we'd already touched on, which was having the conversations with our daughters, right? Just being open about these issues with our girl children, with our boy children. Also important to, with this generation, look at, I think for me, redefining what healthy masculinity is, because there's this notion that, especially when we talk about feminists, and I don't necessarily identify as one, but I understand what it seeks to do. And I sometimes find that often people then think that women don't want a society with men, and that's not necessarily true. I think it's important that people understand that patriarchy is important, that patriarchy is needed in a society. It has a very fundamental, foundational role to play in all of our lives. However, what we've seen over the years is a normalizing of toxic patriarchy. And what we need is to get back to teaching and redefining for our boys what healthy masculinity actually looks like. That protecting girls is not being weak. That loving your wife is not, showing affection and loving your wife in front of your children is not weakness. And so for me, that's the important conversation intergenerationally, is we have to look at how the toxic masculinity has affected the definition of masculinity in its toxicity has affected this generation, and what we've passed on that we now need to re-narrate or redefine for our children.
I want to quickly go through some of the questions that have come through. Okay, and comments. Nandi says South African men only know toxic patriarchy. I can see why you feel that way. Rev.Tembega says, what can big institutions like churches do to fight GBV? I'm going to come to the both of you in a second. That'll be question number one. Liso Chago says, I hope there could be a space in the fight against GBV where males are allowed to be vulnerable and mirror their own traumas so that the healing and fighting process can be integrative. I'm going to second that. We need to also acknowledge that toxic masculinity and toxic patriarchy, men are also victims of that. So it doesn't just affect women. Men are also victims of toxic masculinity. It serves no one. So ladies, from your side, what do you think big institutions can do to fight gender-based violence?
Did you say specifically the church?
Well, the question was to church.
That was the question.
Yeah, big institutions like churches. What can big institutions like churches do?
You want to go first?
I can.
Who wants to take it?
I can kind of jump in. I work for a big institution myself, which is an institution of higher learning. And I think together with the church, specifically the church, I think there's a lot of things that, the church kind of, sweeps under the carpet and, looks at through scripture and things like that. But I think it's important for me. I'm big on creating safe spaces. And when I say safe spaces, I mean spaces where men can be wrong, because it's through talking and relearning that we can change the narrative, the dominant narratives that are existing now. So how we find ourselves here where women are being killed every 3 hours is because it was talked into us. It was engraved through conversations and stories and things like that. And I think it's high time we go back to that, to kind of have conversations where if a man says no, if she says yes, she can't go back to her no. We should be able to correct there and then without attacking. We should be able to correct with education and empathy and understanding that this doesn't just come out of nowhere. This is something that has been ingrained for years and years. And so I'm one for, creating conversations, creating spaces where these conversations can be had, and especially institutions such as churches where, we have an opportunity for ministers to stand up and speak about this.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, please.
I think I 100% agree with you, Masi. I think to add to that for me would be the talking is great, but representation is important. We also have to start being practical about what we want to say. And I think the positive reinforcing of the messages of what we want to see is also important. So we can talk about what's gone wrong and we can try to fix that, but we also then have to practically take the right steps in the direction in which we want to see our society and our institutions.
Absolutely.
And for me, that representation is everything. And when I talk about representation, I'm talking about power representation in important positions, in important spaces, in institutions, whether it's churches, whether it's corporates, whether it's in politics. Where, for instance, I sit here and I say, as a female in the African continent, for the life of me, I still don't understand how it is that in the last century, for instance, we've only ever had 7 female presidents in a continent that constitutes over 50% of women, right? And so for me, it's those conversations that are important about representation, because when our children don't learn by what we tell them, and I have to absolutely emphasize that for this generation, in as much as the conversations are helping, I think we really have a fighting chance with the young minds, with the younger generation. And we have to represent and allow ourselves, or give ourselves permission for them to see this representation of power for women, because that is what will teach them that actually ubaba no ma bayafana, right? A male president and a female president is one and the same thing. A female CEO and a male CEO is one and the same thing. So we also need to be moving in a direction where we're practically taking the steps to become the society that we want to be, sorry.
Thank you for that. Success Chauke says, if it be possible, every police station should have in-house counselor and social worker, as well as a nurse who will strictly focus on getting a rape kit. This will help avoid secondary trauma. I mean, I would love that for that to be the case, but we know we'd be met with the wall that says resources, resources, resources. Ladies, we are running out of time, and I don't want this to cut us without each of us getting an opportunity just to reflect on the conversation and share some final words. So Masi, just from your side, you know, obviously speak on behalf of the foundation and yourself and your own experience. What are some of the parting words you have in regards to GBV in general, but also this particular campaign and the fact that it is a horror movie for many women in this country?
I think, like I said at the beginning, gender-based violence needs to be seen in all angles, holistically. I think we cannot only rely on the justice system to fix this problem. Everyone has a responsibility and a playing hand at this, I think. And, you know, companies and institutions such as or corporates such as MultiChoice and DStv, who are kind of stepping up to say, listen, I'm partnering and I want to kind of make the change that we want to see. I think that's the direction that we should move towards. And as a society, we need to take responsibility. As Ayanda said, it's not only about just talking. I think it's important also actions go a long way. So there must be some social consequence to gender-based violence. We cannot readily accept a rapist back into society without any social consequences, because that, you know, models that is normal, that is okay. And so I think it's up to us as society, it's up to us as the private sector and corporate to join in hand to hand and fight this pandemic that currently has no vaccine. So we all have a part to play, and let's join in and play that part.
Thank you so much. Ayanda, in 1 minute, your wrap-up thoughts.
It's an elephant. It's such a huge elephant. It's a complicated elephant, but it requires, I think, practical, decisive solutions. And we absolutely have to believe that what we're doing is sowing the seeds for a better generation, right? For a better tomorrow for our children. So I think for me, it's everything that Masi has said, and to say, let's not give up. Let's not get tired. Let's continue doing the work. And really truly believe that even if we don't see it in the year or two to come, but that the seeds that we are planting are going to bear fruit for our children in generations to come. And we want to leave this world better than how we found it.
I think that was very well said. Now, for everybody that's watching, thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder to all of you, the Everyday's Halloween for Women trailer is available on Box Office from the 31st of October, which was yesterday. Donations can be made on Box Office when a customer selects Everyday's Halloween for Women content and clicks on the Rent Now button and follows the steps to make a payment. All proceeds go to the Uyinene Mrejana Foundation, with DStv Box Office matching donations from the public. So thank you so much to DStv for that. Box Office is available to DStv customers with an Explorer or Explorer Ultra decoder, and is also available online to DStv customers and non-customers. So if you're able to support, please do so. Thank you so much to everybody for watching. Apologies that we weren't able to get through all of your questions because time was not on our side. And to the both of you, Masi and Ayanda, thank you so much for having this conversation. We know that the fight continues every day. Please continue doing the amazing work that you are both doing.
Thank you. Thank you to you too. You're such a star.
And to everybody who asked for us to save this IG Live, it will be saved. It will be available on my Instagram grid, but I'll also be posting it on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Have a good night. Thank you.